calling from a 417 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Gene from Springfield. How are you doing?
Gene, how are you?
I'm doing well. I just wanted to add something to the conversation you were having about foreign policy and the left in general.
Hey, will you back? Hold on, Gene. Will you back off your phone just a little bit?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just even a little bit more. It's just a little bit. You're breaking up just a little bit. You're a little too hot.
How about here?
Yeah, as far away as you can get from whatever it is you're talking to, the better. And I can put you up.
Okay, here I am. Yep. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the point I was going to make is, and I think Nomiki and yourself made this point actually just as just before I called this. We have a major problem with the issue of developing a left-wing foreign policy, something that fills the gap between liberal interventionism and go home Yankee. There isn't an institutional basis to come up with foreign policy. When we talk about things like Medicare for all or free college, we have concrete proposals to put forward about what an alternative vision for how America is organized under a more social democratic leadership. But when it comes to foreign policy, there just isn't any vision between the extreme of just anti-imperialism and completely withdrawing the United States from the world overnight, and this kind of liberal interventionism that sort of gained currency under Clinton and then later Obama, and which today is virtually indistinguishable from neoconservatism.
Yep.
So we have that vision problem, and at the same time we have very serious institutional problems. You know, the way that the foreign policy establishment is staffed is extremely inbred. It's people from elite universities who do not get their positions based on merit, but are basically getting their position because of the connections they've made in these elite institutions. And this creates a very inbred, a sort of inbred elite that just can't think outside of the box. So, that was the kind of point that I wanted to make, that we need to really look at this, not only for the sake of sort of international affairs, but for development in the United States. The Iraq War was a disaster. Iraq was destroyed. I was there in 2004. I was there in 2014, and it was a mess. It was a mess all the way in that whole decade, which, that I've been visiting Iraq. Not much progress had been made in development. But, Iraq was destroyed, but the real looting that took place in the Iraq War was of the U.S. Treasury. And that has had a fundamental effect on the United States. The oil contracts in Iraq are going to Italian, Turkish companies. But, the U.S. basically kicked open the treasury, and all this military-industrial complex stole the money.
Right. So, it's two-part, it seems to me, what was achieved there. One, it's the Smedley-Butler all war is a racket type of situation. But the other part is that I think from the perspective of a Cheney, he would still say, 80% win. The bottom line is we just wanted to make sure that the Chinese did not have hegemony, and an ability to sort of get access to that oil, for the future conflict that we're going to have in 2040 when we're having to go to war with them. I mean, I honestly think that was their thinking. But let me just say this in terms of the lack of an institutional left foreign policy in this country. The closest thing that we come to any type of a national expression of a leftist foreign policy, it seems to me, was a speech that Bernie Sanders gave I don't know, was it 3 years ago now? Or
yes,
I can't even remember.
Yeah.
And, Matt Duss was his one of his chief foreign policy advisor. He hired him very shortly after the 2016 election, if I remember correctly, because he wanted to build out.
Before, right?
He
Matt
wanted
Duss
to build out that part of his, potential run, I guess, or just his what he was offering. And Duss and Fashkor, the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, both came out, tweeted positive things about Blinken. I read that in one of two ways. One, that they had access to him in the transition or over the years they've had access to him.
Or that they hope to have access?
Or that they hope to have access.
Right.
And I think that, like, I'm not totally outsourcing my perspective on this to Dust, because it could very well be a question of, like, he wants to have access. But I know that he wants to have access not because he wants to move up in foreign policy circles as much as he has a progressive agenda that he wants to be able to put into the mix. And so if he believes there's an opportunity for a progressive voice to sit at the table, I take that as a positive, or at the very least, like, that there's no other options, right? Like I think that, like, I get the sense that Dust is, if he had a list, that Blinken would have been on that list. He may not have been at the top of that list, but there's an opportunity there. There's no doubt, like, and whether it's like how Iraq was doing, 3 years ago, or maybe 2012, Blinken didn't seem to have a clue. His perspective on Syria as to who we could give armaments to and where it would end up, I don't think he had a clue. And Yemen, his whole strategy in terms of Yemen, I mean, it's hard to know exactly whose strategy was what and, who's going along with it, but he certainly was associated with it. I think that was completely a mistake. The whole thing, like, we could do some type of constructive engagement with the Saudis. And if we do, this is going to be, increase our leverage with the Saudis, and we're going to hold them back. I mean, it didn't work. But I think he's aware of it. And if he's soliciting at least a progressive or left agenda on foreign policy, I think that's a positive. And it may be as good as we can do in the absence, a complete absence, it seems to me, of a left foreign policy. I mean,
the closest we got to a left foreign policy, really, I would say, was just what Obama was running on in the 2008 election, which wasn't even really policy. It was just harnessing the anger towards the Iraq, right, the Iraq and Afghanistan war. But there was that opportunity there to galvanize upon populist anger towards those wars and the atrocities and the loss of life and the illegality, specifically of the Iraq war. But that didn't happen, really. I feel like once we talk about the left going to sleep, when Obama got elected and continued to kind of push back the deadline of removing us from those conflicts, like, all of that energy was sapped. And now it's kind of in this ether where we don't have the infrastructure and we don't have the push to do so. I mean, Bernie's emphasis on foreign policy was good, but I would not say it's central to the left.
No, of course not.
And not in the way it should be. Right.
And even the Matt Dust
frankly,
thing, though,
the conversations that Gene and Michael had was one of, like, the few, a podcast should not be, sort of like corner the market on this stuff. But, like, there's very few places where there's, like, any type of, like, institutional or even like an arena where you hear some type of, like, progressive left foreign policy perspective.
Unless it's just about the threat of China, the threat of Russia, the threat of X, Y, and Z, right? Like, there isn't actual that's what dominates discussion in mainstream news about what we do.
I think the whole thing with Matt Dust, though, is we have to be really cautious about these things. Just because somebody tweets something does not mean it's necessarily a signal that they actually care about that person. There are multi-layers, like you said. It could mean that he wants access, but it also could mean that he's there to signal to the left that this guy's okay, or both, whether it's intuitive or strategic. I mean,
who is the other progressive left? Who is the other left foreign policy advisor?
Jim Zogby.
Who?
Jim Zogby.
Who is he served with in like, as an advisor? Like, where, like, I'm just saying,
Bill
like,
Clinton, Barack Obama, shall I go on? Bernie Sanders is senior advisor. He was, the chair of the Sanders Institute, specifically focusing on foreign policy. I mean, there are plenty of people on the left who have been voices for change. It's just, there's no concrete theory. And part of it is because I think of the dynamic, partly it's a newer space. Partly
how has Zogby reacted to the Blinken pick?
I actually haven't checked. I haven't looked up. I mean, this is, I'm sure he's posted something on Twitter. And he's independent. He's not sitting here trying to leverage himself for another job or, whatever. We're all human. I'm not like criticizing Dusk, but that's just how people are, right? He doesn't, Zogby doesn't need, he's 70 something years old. He's not looking for his next gig.
Well, I'm not. It could be that Duss is looking for his next gig, but the point is that if he thinks that it's possible he could get one, I think that's encouraging, because there's a lot of people he would be completely locked out from.
100%. But there's no sense that he can pressure him. And there's also, like, if we're putting all of our eggs in that basket, we've got some real serious issues here as a movement.
I would not disagree that we have some very serious issues. I mean, Joe Biden won. So, like, there is a part of me that I totally agree with you and Nomiki in terms of just like rhetorically what we want to push for. But I guess the fact that I'm resigned to it is more just I think the Biden camp is trying to toe a line, but that they're not going to specifically give life or too much life to the left. And I think that's strategic in and of itself. At the same time, I don't think the left has leverage right now. I think it hasn't been used effectively. And I think there's going to be a recalibration in 2022. There just has to be outside pressure in terms of, like the best leverage that the left has are vocal leaders in Congress like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who can use their bully pulpit and their online platform to critique the Biden administration. But outside of that, I don't know.
One point that I'd just like to sort of conclude on, so I don't take too much of your time, is simply, I think Nomiki spoke to it, is the lack of vision. So if we do get people with leverage, what is the objective? So if our objective is to disband the empire, inverted commas, how do we actually achieve that within the existing system? How do you get a proof of concept? Can you just pull out of East Asia overnight? I mean, we have to start thinking about concrete, detailed ways where we can actually do things. For example, pulling out of Europe, although there would be enormous hostility amongst the democratic establishment, would make total sense as a place to get, as a first place to remove American military forces from. The same issue with Afghanistan. America has not been militarily defeated in Afghanistan, but after 20 years, sometimes you just have to give up the ghost, and it's been a political defeat, and it's just going to go on and on and on. So there has to be some kind of concrete plan. How, if, for example, you have President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 10, 15 years' time, how is she going to both start dismantling the American empire and at the same time maintaining some kind of legitimacy and support and momentum behind that progress, and not sort of provoking a backlash that will halt the progress? And I just think we as people on the left just haven't really thought about that, because it's very easy to get into the Yankee go home kind of mentality. And Nomiki spoke to it earlier. You had people, you have people who react against American imperialism and end up lauding Colonel Gaddafi or Assad or Saddam Hussein, who are, people not worth lauding. So I think we really need to concretely think about this, not just because of, the deleterious effect of the American empire overseas, but also the effect it has on American internal politics.
And the effect it has on other, hegemonically, like, yes, it could empower China, and yes, it could empower a Putin. Forget about Russia. Forget about, whatever romantic theories you have of Stalin in Russia. It's specifically, when we do pull out of regions like Turkey, for instance, what does that create a gap for? What is that? How does that empower Turkey? How does that empower Turkey in its pressure against Armenia? And what is Armenia really about? Is it about Iran? Like, we have to really think about these things from a complicated perspective of when you pull out, what kind of vacuum is created, and how does that affect interests, even other countries that we that do not have the military power. So if we don't want further conflict, we have to think about what are the consequences of us pulling out and other forces coming in who don't necessarily care about the humanistic aspects of Armenia, for instance. Right. So,
but the United States has had a presence in Turkey since the end of the Second World War. They had nuclear weapons there, and it still hasn't done anything to stop Turkey's aggression against Greece, against Rojava, and now in Armenia. So how is that leverage being used? It strikes me, for example, with the specific case of Turkey, the United States is actually providing cover for Turkey's increasingly aggressive behavior in the Eastern Mediterranean and other places, precisely because it's inside that American system and it has that advantage that Iran doesn't have. When we conceptualize a new Middle East policy, we definitely need to move away from a policy that favors certain nations over others in terms of their aggressive expansionist aims, whether it's Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Turkey.
All right, Gene, I appreciate the call. We'll have you on to talk about this, I think, a little bit more in depth so we can have some room, but I appreciate thanks for calling in.